At first, it seemed harmless. A few teenagers sneaking into his backyard late at night, splashing around in his pool, and leaving without a trace. But when it kept happening, night after night, one man decided he'd had enough. What he did next? It left the entire neighborhood in shock. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more unbelievable stories like this. And tell us in the comments, what would you do if strangers kept sneaking into your pool? Let's hear your ideas. Will Parker had spent decades working hard to afford his dream home in Scottsdale, Arizona. A peaceful neighborhood, a spacious backyard, and, his favorite part, a beautiful, custom-built pool. For the retired engineer, it was his sanctuary. But lately, something wasn't right. One morning, he stepped outside with his usual cup of black coffee. And that's when he saw it. The pool cover, which he always secured before bed, was partially off. Will frowned. Maybe it was just the wind? But as he walked closer, he spotted something else. A wet towel, crumpled near the edge of the pool. His stomach twisted. That wasn't there last night. His eyes drifted to the side yard, where his 6-foot wooden fence stood tall. Then he saw them. Wet footprints, leading straight to the back gate. Someone had been in his pool. And worse, they had sneaked in while he was asleep. Will spent the day shaking it off. Maybe it was a one-time thing. Maybe some kids from the neighborhood had dared each other to jump into a stranger's pool. Annoying, but harmless. But then, it happened again. And again. Every morning, he'd wake up to the same signs. The pool cover moved. The deck wet. And sometimes, random items left behind. A cheap pair of sunglasses. A half-empty soda can. Even a pair of sneakers. Will's patience wore thin. "All right," he muttered, clenching his jaw. "You want to use my pool? Let's see how much fun you have when I fight back." Because now, he had a plan. The next morning, Will went to a hardware store. He bought a huge, bright red "No trespassing" sign. By that afternoon, it was bolted onto his fence. For good measure, he also installed a cheap security camera above the gate. That night, Will stayed up late. He sat in his darkened living room, watching the camera feed on his phone. Hours passed. Nothing. Then, 1:47 a.m. Movement. 3 figures appeared on the screen. Teenagers. They hopped the fence like it was nothing, laughing quietly. One of them, a tall, cocky-looking kid with bleached hair, pointed at the camera. And then, he flipped it off. The group jumped into the pool, splashing and goofing around, completely ignoring the giant warning sign. Will's fingers tightened into fists. "All right, kids," he muttered. "You asked for it." Because now, it was war. Will spent the next day preparing. First, he ordered a special non-toxic dye, the kind used in fountains to prevent algae growth. The best part? It was invisible at first, but reacted to body heat after a few minutes. Meaning, the next time these kids jumped in, they'd get out completely dyed. And the second step? Motion-activated floodlights, placed strategically around the yard. The moment someone moved near the pool, the entire yard would light up like a stadium. And for the final touch, a hidden speaker, wired to play a pre-recorded police dispatch call. That night, the trespassers were in for the scare of their lives. 1:45 a.m. The camera feed flickered. There they were. The same 3 kids. They hopped the fence, laughing, completely unaware that tonight, everything was different. They ripped off their shirts and jumped into the water. At first, everything seemed normal. But then, 5 minutes in, Jake, the bleach-haired kid, froze. "Dude, what the hell?" he muttered. His hands, they were turning bright blue. Then, his arms, his chest, his face. Within seconds, all three of them were dyed. A deep, glowing blue. "Dude, what is happening?" one of them shrieked. Then, bam! The floodlights exploded on. Blinding red light flooded the yard. And then, a deep, booming voice from the hidden speaker. "Warning! Trespassers detected. Law enforcement has been notified. Remain where you are." Jake screamed. The second boy tried to climb out of the pool, only to slip, hitting the pavement. The third one, he bolted toward the fence, but was so panicked that he ran straight into it. Then, distant sirens. The real ones. A police car was patrolling nearby. And the flashing lights in the distance. They sent the kids over the edge. Scrambling, tripping, slipping, they ran. Dripping blue dye everywhere as they vanished into the night. Will. He stood by the window, grinning. But what neither he nor the kids realized. The real nightmare was coming in the morning. Because by then, the entire town would know exactly what had happened. The prank had worked, maybe even too well. The trespassers thought they had escaped, but the next morning, they woke up to a nightmare. And Will Parker, he wasn't done teaching them a lesson. What happened next turned a simple prank into a town-wide scandal. 7 a.m. Jake Thompson, better known as Bleach Hair Kid, groggily rolled out of bed after a terrible night of sleep. His heart was still racing from what had happened at the pool. The sirens, the lights, the terrifying voice, and worst of all, the mystery blue dye that had turned him into a human smurf. Maybe it would wash off in the morning. He stumbled into the bathroom, turned on the sink, and scrubbed at his arms. But nothing happened. His stomach dropped. He scrubbed harder. Still blue. Panic set in. He turned to the mirror, eyes wide. His entire face, arms, and chest were still completely stained. And then, his phone buzzed. He grabbed it. 75 new messages. And the first one, a picture of him, taken in the pool. His dyed blue skin glowing under the floodlights. And the caption, "Pool bandit caught blue-handed." Jake's blood ran cold. Because this wasn't just a picture. It was everywhere. Snapchat, Instagram, even the school's Facebook page. And then, his mom's voice echoed from downstairs. "Jacob Thompson, get down here now." Jake felt sick. Because he knew he was screwed. By noon, the entire town of Scottsdale was talking about the pool bandits. Local high school students were sending memes. One kid edited Jake's blue face onto a smurf. Another called him Jake the Genie. And then, it made the local news. A short news segment aired on Channel 5. 3 unidentified teenagers were caught trespassing in a private backyard pool last night. Thanks to a harmless but clever prank, they were marked with a bright blue dye that will take days to wash off. Locals are calling it justice in the deep end. Jake buried his face in his hands. His 2 friends, Kyle and Brent, were just as miserable. Brent's dad grounded him for a month. Kyle's mom took his phone and car keys. And Jake, his entire summer was over. But what none of them realized, Will Parker still wasn't done. Because now, he had one final trick up his sleeve. That evening, Will was relaxing on his porch when he saw it. A nervous-looking woman walking up his driveway. She knocked, and when Will opened the door, she let out a sigh. "Mr. Parker, I'm Melissa Thompson, Jake's mother." Will crossed his arms. Melissa looked exhausted. "I just want to say, I'm so sorry for what my son did. I had no idea he was sneaking out like that." Will nodded but said nothing. She continued, "He told me what happened, and I'd like him to apologize in person. If you're willing." Will raised an eyebrow. "All right," he said. Let's see if he's man enough to own up to it. 15 minutes later, Jake and his friends stood in Will's backyard. Their skin was still tinted blue. They looked humiliated. Will stared at them. "Well," he said. "Anything to say?" Jake sighed. "Look, man, we messed up. We shouldn't have snuck in." "I'm sorry." Kyle and Brent nodded, avoiding eye contact. Will studied them. Then he smiled. "All right. Apology accepted." The boys exhaled in relief. "But," Will added, "you're still gonna make things right." Jake froze. "What do you mean?" Will's grin widened. "You're gonna work it off." The boys blinked. "Work?" Will clapped his hands together. "Congratulations, gentlemen. You just became my new pool cleaners." Jake's jaw dropped. "You can't be serious." Will leaned in. "Do you want me to press charges?" Jake gulped. "When do we start?" Will grinned. "Now." For the next 3 weekends, Jake, Kyle, and Brent showed up at 7 a.m. sharp to clean Will's pool. Scrubbing tiles, skimming leaves, cleaning filters, all while the neighbors watched, laughing. Kids from their school took pictures. Someone even made a TikTok about it. Remember the pool bandits? They're paying off their crime, one chlorine tablet at a time. The video went viral. And Jake, he knew he'd never live this down. After their last day of cleaning, the boys stood in front of Will. They were exhausted, sunburnt, and completely humbled. Will studied them for a long moment. Then he smiled. "You know," he said, "you boys aren't bad kids. Just stupid." Jake let out a small laugh. "Yeah, we kind of figured that out." Will nodded. "You learned something." Kyle wiped sweat from his forehead. "Yeah. Don't mess with people's property." Brent added, "and don't underestimate old guys." Will laughed. "Good. Now get outta here. And stay outta my pool." The boys didn't argue. They just walked away. And this time, they didn't even look back at the fence. Because they knew they weren't coming back. Ever. Will Parker proved that sometimes the best revenge isn't about punishment, it's about teaching a lesson. If you believe in creative justice, hit like, subscribe, and share this story. And tell us in the comments, what would you have done in Will's place?